Welcome to this session with the wonderful Nik Ranger. She's a senior practitioner in technical SEO, and she did an AI visibility study with 7 million synthetic fan-out queries generated from Search Console for global travel platform. And I'm really interested in that fan-out query and what's going on, especially from my perspective within the Kalicube framework of this part, which is recruitment, grounding, and display. So walk me through what the data was and overall what you found.
Jason, it's wonderful to be here. Hello, everyone from Melbourne, Australia. So the only reason why I can't really say that the client is that that it's under NDA, but I'm more than happy to talk about it because it was a really, really interesting project that we worked together on. So to step back, like travel experiences, the booking market, so to speak, like that is operating at the moment, I think, under a fundamental shift in how customers are finding things to do. Their customer base used to, just search and find competing directories. So they would type in their destination, like maybe things that they want to do. They would get a little list together, and they would essentially just be clicking around and, finding things and just putting it into Excel sheets or documents, or whatever organizer their notes app, right? But now it's a conversation. So a traveler planning a trip to Tokyo, for instance, I love Japan, I just came back from there. They don't just type, things to do in Tokyo and scroll through, what we used to see, those 10 blue links. They ask an AI, and now that they're going to get a synthesized answer, and the brands in that answer, those are the ones that get the booking consideration. Those brands outside it don't even exist in that moment. For a global travel experiences platform, the stakes for them and everyone in that market is absolutely enormous. You're competing across hundreds of destinations, tens of thousands of activity categories, multiple languages, local markets, and the AI is grounding and selecting pieces of evidence about their brand for consideration, whether it ends up in their results or not. And it's doing all of that pretty much all at the same time simultaneously, just using RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to be able to formulate that result. So across that entire competitive landscape, to the client, they reached out to us because they wanted to, figure out, some answers for some pretty key, questions that wanted to know, their stakeholders wanted to know, and how they were going to plan for that. So they wanted to know things like, well, how is Google, Gemini, ChatGPT, how are they what are they actually selecting? Like, do we even surface for what's important to us? What are we being recommended for? And more importantly, what aren't we being recommended for that our competitors are leveraging that ground? So to do that, we use query fan out. So
right.
And fan out essentially
for the query fan out, how did you figure out what the fan out queries would be? So you had a base query. How did you decide what the fan out queries would be that you would track?
Yeah. So, you open up Search Console nowadays and you get some cool impression data. That's kind of telling you what's already working, but it's not really telling you anything about the query space that the AI is actually traversing when it's deciding, who to recommend. So Dan Petrovich, who I work with, he replicated Google's query fan out patent and actually built a process where we take a client's existing Search Console queries, use those as seeds, and use like a language model to essentially generate synthetic expansions of those queries, which represents like the multi-dimensional space of ways that a customer might ask something that will hopefully connect to our client's content. That's, I think, a lot more elegant way because it's actually using queries that we already rank for. So we can be able to tie it back into something that the team can be able to see and be able to relate in their mind of how that connects to content, which is really, really helpful just, in a workshop kind of space when we're talking about query fan out. to a bunch of content marketers.
Right.
So that's
And
actually where we got the 7 million synthetic queries. Sorry.
right.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So my question there is, what were the types of queries that come into the fan out? Is it fanning out to try and cover the entire space? Is it fanning out to see what might come next? Or is it fanning out to try to give the complete answer or the most exact answer?
Yeah, good question. So when you do query fan out, it's typically going to split out into two different waves of the market share, if you will, of the way that a large language model can conceivably find your brand. So from these seed queries, we're already knowing like what we're already surfacing for. So we can already say like, okay, well, based on everything that you could possibly have as a point that you would be able to surface for versus what you already currently rank for, these are the areas where we're doing well, and these are the areas where there's a significant gap. And so for this particular client, and I also want to say, like, they're global clients, the numbers are absolutely crazy huge, but 7 million isn't a number that you can take to a content team and just say, like, all right, great, let's work with that now. So we needed to break that number down and create essentially like a system of prioritization, right? So what we did there was we took their data and trained we basically trained a model on that data and did a custom volume estimation model on their specific like Search Console queries. So this was like event-driven, there are like different destinations, seasonality, all those things, like to essentially rank the fan art data and by the predicted demands. So using their actual like click data, impression data, so on and so forth. So it's a little bit more like tied to something that they can, that they're already getting, they're already expecting.
So you were aiming to find the fan out queries that they could actually aim for to be part of the conversation. So then the question is, how many or what percentage of the fan out queries were questions that people might well ask, and which ones were purely questions that the machine thought, this is going to help me answer the question?
Yeah, essentially. And that's really, really helpful, because then that's now now we can sort of go through and map it to their customer journey funnel. That was searching for. We can then start to do like query classification on that, map it out to the funnel, and then say like, well, now in these different areas, we are actually starting to see gaps. So yeah, here's where we're doing well, and we're already surfacing for. But these are the specific synapses of synthetic queries that we don't have any groundwork for. We can already see through our method of prioritization with actually seeing like that custom estimation of, like what is the demand for these queries. Now we're starting to like reduce this number into like, okay, let's go after something a little bit more heavily skewed towards the consideration phase. Let's start to look at the commercial phase. Maybe even like, let's look at the aftercare, like like after they've hit purchase, like do they come back, do they give feedback, is there something that they can be able to add as an additional experience. So all these little key moments we're able to like identify, and then start to work with their content teams to create really, really helpful wrap-up pieces that take a huge section of this and make this into pieces of content that actually will be better served for that particular type of intent.
Is there a particular form of content that actually survives in this world? Because obviously the machines are picking up the content, thinking, does this actually help? And then not citing an awful lot of it. So if it's looking at 80 different pieces of content, it's only citing 5 or 6. Have you got data on A, how much is cited compared to how much is viewed or analyzed, and B, what kind of content survives?
What kind of content survives is really, really hyper specific to this client. I say that for two reasons. One, because I think a lot of people ask the same question. We've all heard through so many people that listicles work, so everyone makes listicles, and inevitably anything that is done with regularity and it's spoken about, this is easily fingerprinted. Come on, guys, we work with algorithms, we analyze them, we figure them out. If we're making easily replicatable content types, they're very, very easy algorithmically to be able to identify. So that's what I mean to say, like, the kinds of content that work is so specific to this particular client. We look at this type of work and we say, like, okay, well, what is currently working for you right now? And this is where using predictive models to basically understand, what is the click-through rate distribution for their current content that works well through ranks 1 to 10. What does that look like? What types of content is that? Is that are these evidence-based pieces where they have real human people on the ground experiencing what it's like in Greece or Athens, or what it's like in Tokyo, going through Disneyland, or going through on the Shinkansen. Are there people that are doing like this live kind of content, and what can we be able to replicate based on the resources and the business case that we can be able to put forward to replicate more pieces like it? Because at the end of the day, I think content teams work exceptionally hard, and they have a huge amount of pressure on them to perform and to have metrics that show the value of a heavily resource intensive aspect to any business's budget. So for us, it's basically saying, like, look, this is the choices that your team have made that have been doing well. These are the new this is the new research that we've been able to discover where we're seeing significant gaps in the market. Let's be able to pull this together and create a conversation where we're wanting to replicate that and use our influencer networks, use our our on the ground journalists in these specific locations that are doing reviews and things like that, or can we be able to have photos? Can we have videos? Can we have something that is a little bit of a point of difference that does work, that we can see? Or even just creating different types of content in a text-based format that does work, and see whether the algorithm, the large language model, is selecting them in those specific results. So everything is a meaningful test, and really that's where we come into the conversation with business case to hopefully unlock resources so we can be able to enrich that content experience for the end user.
Okay. Well, the next question, thank you for that, is the differences between Gemini and ChatGPT, because I think that's a huge question we're kind of all asking ourselves. What are the differences in terms of what they select, what they use, and how they present it?
Yeah, huge differences. And I think, this is what a lot of people are really interested in, because I think, I think the number, there's a few numbers that really changed the conversation with the clients in the way that they thought about, what this looks like from just a cross-channel alignment, right? Those numbers were 110 to 60. 110 Google citations. So when we did citation mining, we wanted to see what the model was actually using as a link pointing back, pointing out to different service providers or vendors or different platforms and the like. There are 110 of them from Google. There was only 2 from ChatGPT citations, and there were 16 URLs that ChatGPT had actually pulled into consideration, evaluated, and actively set aside. So for these particular numbers, essentially, Google is showing their platform to travelers at the research stage, right? ChatGPT was not.
Right.
So in those 16 cases where ChatGPT had done it, it had essentially pulled it in, but decided it wasn't the right answer and recommended someone else entirely instead. So that lost consideration is the exact moment where a customer is hopefully deciding to either use them or their competitor. So how it translates to, gosh, I keep saying almost saying the brand. How it translates to the client for them, this is a market share story, right? So the AI recommendation layer is becoming the dominant discovery channel for that high intent travel planning. The traveler who asks ChatGPT, like, okay, well, what is the best cooking class in, I love Thailand, in Chiang Mai? Is, that is further along in their purchase journey than the person running a generic search. So they're closer to converting. Losing that customer to a competitor because the AI passing your content, that's more of like a commercial problem with a specific cause where the drop-off curve tells you which type of problem you're dealing with. If the content is largely absent from the consideration pool, that's where we're having a massive presence problem. So that's where we're like really looking at like the selection rate, like when it actually, when we observe it, when the URLs is accessible and is going through the particular page. A lot of what we found is like only like, I think like 2,000 characters at most of any particular page is actually used in its retrieval process to be able to create that result. And we're hoping that from that sample of content that it pulls from the page, that there is something meaningful within that they will use for their results. And this is really what we use to measure with the brand to entity, entity to brand. AI rank.dejan.ai, right? Like, that's there, that's free, but it's essentially just trying to figure out, for your brand to the entity that you want to be the most associated for, what is the frequency of how many times that you are added, and what is the rank. And when I say rank, I mean like what is the order in which your brand is surfaces within that result. So what is like, who is the best booking what is the best travel experience platform for Tokyo? I'm sorry, I'm really struggling with client's name. What is the best platform for tickets for Shibuya, the train, right? And they might, have, this answer, this brand, this brand, this brand, this brand. If your brand is the first one noticed, we count that as like a rank of one. So on and so forth. So how many times do you surface
prominence
frequently?
within the result?
Yeah.
Well, it's presence, prominence,
and where do you
sentiment.
actually, where do you actually surface for? So that's something what we use as like a weighted score to be able to measure that over time. We measure the volatility and variance.
Okay, yeah, with Lawrence O'Toole, we were discussing, and we've got a weighted citability score that is fundamentally the same idea. It's, are you present? Are you the first one to be mentioned? And is the sentiment positive for you? You get a weighted citability score. Love the idea. And we're talking about here what I'm calling recruited. You mentioned the word selected, but the idea is, are you recruited by the algorithm as an option? And then are you discarded or you kept, used for grounding? And then are you kept from the grounding to be pushed into display where you're actually shown both as a link and as a brand? So there are 3 steps there. How do you feel about that particular, the recruited, grounded, and display?
Yeah, I mean, like, you're measuring the cascade from recruited through grounded through displayed, and that's exactly right. The comparable thing to the way that we do it is, we're doing it from the demand side. So we're mapping the query space first, and then watching which doors the engine opens and which it walks past. So it's entirely comparable. It's very cool
And
that, on either sides of the globe, we're coming
yeah.
to, the same conclusions.
Well, I was talking to Kevin Indig, and we were talking about macro measurement. And he basically just described what I've done, and then I described what he's done. And there is a lot of meeting of minds across with the people who are really thinking this through and looking at it from the perspective of the conversation is happening within the engine. The engine is recommending what it feels to be the best solution. So it's always get the user to the best solution to their problem as efficiently as possible is the key. And this whole, the whole process is all about that. It's the best answer to the problem as efficiently as possible. And I find that recruited, grounded, displayed part very interesting. So I was talking to Krishna Madhavan about that, and he, with Bing, they're releasing a lot of data inside the console. Have you had a look at that?
Yeah, it's so helpful. We recommend all of our clients, if they haven't set up Bing, to set it up, because then it adds like an additional contextual lens, in the same way when you're looking at Search Console and you're seeing, really, really helpful engagement metrics like, click-through rate. You still want to be able to go to Google Analytics 4 and looking at, the session, the time, the balance, like, where they're clicking from, like the like that whole flow chart, to be able to give you some additional context. So Bing is exceptionally helpful. And, I think Google's now come to play, and that's why we have impressions in, for our AI visibility in there. But it still offers way much more transparency.
Yeah, I mean, Google are now in a position where suddenly they've got competition that didn't really exist before. I mean, to an extent that they need to worry about it. So Bing are being very open. Google are having to be more open. And with ChatGPT as well, much more focus on that. How much are you seeing Google become more open about the data that they were previously, let's say, not holding back, but they weren't pushing very quickly to give it to us?
That I feel like is more of like a political question. Like I went to such, I think, we can look at this in so many different ways. We have, people like Gary Ish, and we have Daniel Weissman, and we have Cherry and Tomowin. I might be saying her last name incorrectly. But we, and of course, John Muir and Martin Split, and we have, lots of amazing Googlers who are very willing to have a conversation with us and to triage our questions. I think it's amazing that they do that at all, because they didn't have to. And, we get visibility over when there is like a core algorithm updates. We don't really get the same kind of visibility for, tweaks and changes within the models, like for post-training within large language models. But we know when, they're using a whole new model altogether. And, I'm, at the moment, I'm doing like a fun little test just for my own curiosity, testing, Gemini 2.5 versus 3.1 to see what is the, whether TurboQuant has had an impact in the way that it's having less results in the way that it's pulling this. Like it's interesting, but I feel like more is being obfuscated, and there is still there is still like an olive branch of people wanting to converse with us. And I think that it's really, really nice that they do that. And I think always keep that in mind when you're asking a question, because what if they weren't there at all? What if they completely just turned off the page of core algorithm updates and we just only saw volatility? That would be really, really tough. But I think that they like having a conversation with us. I think they learn a lot from us. of what to do and also what not to do. In the same way where I was saying, like, repeatable patterns get fingerprinted pretty quickly. They are paying attention when things happen. And, you know, they can, you know, they are on the tool tweakers that are tweaking the models and the way that they are responding to us, you know, with the post-training, or even like, you know, doing experiments before core algorithm updates happen. And that's why we see, like, for a whole bunch of queries, we see intent shifts. We see, you know, it's why we have algorithmic suppressions, you know, things that are done without manual actions. You know, we still have that, but to some extent, they try and give manual actions. They send out messages, and they have content that a lot of people don't like. But I just think the web is so huge. The amount of people thinking about this every single day in such granularity is so massive, and they are a team that are trying to do things at scale that are trying to make the best result.
Right.
And then they have shareholders, and they have all kinds of other things, you know, creating all kinds of different pools in different ways. So yeah, I think I think I try and like keep kindness in mind when I think about like the way that we're talked to about this.
Yeah, I mean, I've found Bing to be, the Bing engineers to be super helpful and super open in the interviews that I've done with them. That's been hugely helpful. And as you say, all of the engines, well, Bing and Google are engaging now. But then the last question is about this recruitment moment. And at Kalicube, what we've been looking at is the algorithmic trinity. So you have an LLM, intelligence, search engine, information, and a knowledge graph, validation or verification. So an LLM to have the conversation, search engine for fresh information and information the LLM doesn't have in its training data, and then the knowledge graph to make sure that it's getting the facts about entities and topics correct. And the recruitment moment is an interesting moment there, because for a search engine, I would say, well, it's immediate. It's recruiting and it's deciding and it's showing. But to train the LLM or to add information to the knowledge graph, it's a slower pace, i.e. by retraining the model, they will select the data to retrain the model. They will clean it up and they will feed it to the model with a particular idea of what they want the model to, how they want the model to improve. Same with the knowledge graph. We saw that with Google focusing on person entities 3 years ago, and they tripled the number of people in the knowledge graph. So they had recruited content specifically for that, I would assume, cleaned it up and put it in the knowledge graph to get the person entities. So end of that very long comment by me is there are two speeds. One is search, which is immediately visible, and what we see with the citations through the LLMs, or through the assistive engines. And then the second speed is training data for LLMs and training data for the knowledge graph, which is significantly slower, months rather than hours, minutes, or days. How do you feel about that?
I feel that there are a lot of levers that control how things are done that are not immediately obvious or recognizable to us when we are testing this. Just a few days ago, I think, or it might not be days, it might actually be the course of years of campaign work by a team of lawyers. But Germany, as I think a country, has essentially created precedents that Google as a company is legally responsible for AI generated results in their search engines. So the fact that one of the first things that we saw, search generative experience, SGE, when it first was released, rushed in a lot of retrospective opinion and also mine. The first thing that they did was they looked at, EEAT contents, which I just cannot fathom as to why, out of all the type of content, they would tackle that first. So EEAT, experience, expertise, authority, trust. So typically things that would impact YMYL, your money, your life. And now that there is this there's this decree, which no doubt that will, be tried to overturn by Google's lawyers, because it's a huge precedent to set. If that sticks, if that is directionally what is happening, then I would imagine that we're going to see a huge shift in the way that the results are being used. And I think even today, Dan was talking about. Hang on, I'm just going to bring it up because this is actually the reason. Sorry for using my keyboard while I'm doing this. But yes, Dan even found today that Gemini's native web search grounding is limited to 1,500 daily calls, which is useless for most serious applications. Downgrading to Gemini 2.5 gives us 5,000, which is better, but still not great. And we see, like a diminishing return of peak requests per day of the search grounding results. And, I thought a lot of different ideas, and you can go to the comments and read my ideas. And again, this is why I was like wanting to test the models alongside of Turboplate and see whether it's like an efficiency problem, efficiency answer rather. But again, he said the model is static, so it will always show the same until I fine tune it, which again, we can only really speculate the some of the reasons and the mechanisms as to what it's doing, but in the way that it is pre-training or even post-training its models, there are a lot of different reasons and levers that govern potentially the way that they're going to really try and steer it. And there's two frames of thought within machine learning that I've done my best to really acquaint with over the last few years, which is mechanistic interpretability, which is the machine learning science of the tokenistic probability of one word preceding the next, to actually understand why the model chose that word in the way that it surfaces, and to we've done extraordinary amounts of testing with tree walker analysis, essentially trying to replicate results and see why they're doing it. And again, this is from people that haven't got data science degrees. And I'm sure Dawn Anderson, who I know we're going to be talking to, has wonderful ideas about this. But I think it's really, really interesting that that's very much at play. And then we have model steering and model control. So model steering is typically what we're all interested in. We're all interested to steer that model towards our clients, to our sources of information, our sources of truth, and that looks at the primary the bias of every AI model that a customer consults has already it's already formed an opinion about your brands even before the query arrives, because a pre-trained model, if it's got you in there, has been trained to have your brands described, rated, compared, recommended, and sometimes even if there is negative sentiment, criticized. The sum of that training is what we think of as primary bias. We wanting to change that, and that's where doing citation mining, looking at where it's sourcing of its results, that maybe we can do digital PR campaigns to put out certain types of content that works on that sentiment and starts to really work on the public's opinion in the way that it thinks about the brands.
Right.
It's that agentic layer of sentiment within the model and the way that it's actually doing that. And we've even done that with a client that does custom sports jerseys. They were seen as a German client. They were operating in the US. They were never surfaced whatsoever, because when it was looking for results, it was looking for more American brands, American vendors for making sports jerseys. Even though that this client of ours was, had decades of legacy and physical locations operating on site where it was creating these custom journeys and sending them out with like US based representatives and teams and physical like locations. We worked with our clients to look at the on-page content. We looked at the PR campaigns, and we did a lot of recommendations to do different short runs of media and social media and lots of different levers that we could be able to use to influence that this is actually an American company. And over a year and a couple of model updates, we've actually got this client to be considered a US-based company for its US operations.
Which, brilliant. And which actually comes back to the point kind of that I was making, is that the search results will surface immediately. But if you want to change the fundamental opinion of the model, it takes you just about a year. So you have two speeds of ingestion by the machines, depending on whether you're talking about search or whether you're talking about the LLM, which is the case you gave, or indeed the knowledge graph, which is my favorite topic.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was delightful. Thank you, everybody. And I'll see you in the next session. Thank you, Nik.
Thank you so much, Jason. It was an absolute pleasure.